Hi, this is David at TED-IELTS, and I'm back after a long break with another grammar video for you. Today we're going to talk about semicolons. This is a punctuation mark that people tend to think is really difficult, almost impossible to use, but actually it's not. I'm going to show you just 3 rules that you need to know in order to use this very well in your own writing, and it will even help you with your reading skills when you encounter this punctuation mark. Before we start learning how to use it, we should know what they are. You can see a picture here of a semicolon. It looks like a comma with a dot on top of it. A semicolon is a kind of punctuation mark that is less common than commas or periods. That's full stops as another word for periods. They're used typically in academic writing, and you don't see them much in casual everyday writing anymore. They allow for flexibility and connection between ideas, and they're primarily used to divide parts of a sentence. So there are 3 rules that we can learn in order to use these properly. I'm going to teach you these in order of their frequency. First of all is a compound sentence. We use semicolons to divide independent clauses in compound sentences. The structure is independent clause, semicolon, conjunctive adverb, comma, plus independent clause. Don't worry if that sounds complicated. I'll show you some examples and you'll see it's actually not very difficult. A conjunctive adverb is a word like however or therefore or meanwhile. They're very common. You use them quite often, and I'm sure you've seen this kind of sentence many times before. Here are 4 examples. Let's look at them. I've highlighted the middle part where we have the semicolon. So last year I went to the Parthenon in Athens. However, it was undergoing renovation work. So we have 2 independent clauses here. I visited the Parthenon in Athens. It was undergoing renovation work. We want to join these because an essay made up of simple, short sentences doesn't sound very good. And the word that would best link these is however. To use this word, we have a semicolon and then the conjunctive adverb, however, and then a comma. The second one we use thus, the third one we use therefore, and the fourth one we use as a result. Next, we have complex lists. So a basic list is just item 1 plus comma, item 2 plus comma, and or item 3. In an advanced list, however, we might have a comma within an item in this list, and in that case we use semicolons in order to divide them to make it clearer. By the way, before we look at some examples here, I have another video that you can check out, and this video talks in detail about how to write lists, and it tells you everything you could want to know, including advanced listing techniques. So here we say, I traveled to France, Germany, and Spain. So each item is just a single word. It's just one basic thing. But what if we wanted to mention a country in a city in each country? We could say Bordeaux, France, Munich, Germany, and Barcelona, Spain. And in this case, because each item contains a comma, we divide them with a semicolon. We can see more examples here. I've used colors to make obvious the difference between the 3 items in each list. So again, we have places. In this case, it's cities in American states. So Birmingham, Alabama, Galveston, Texas, and Jacksonville, Florida. Next is much more complicated. So we're listing lots of different kinds of food and drink, but each one is separate. So we've got the fruit salad, we've got the potato salad, and then we've got drinks with details about each. And the third example here, we can see we've got my laptop, and then we've used a relative clause to give information about it. Then there's the TV, and then another relative clause, and then the oven, and a third relative clause. So these are cases when we might want to separate our items with a semicolon, because if you just use lots and lots of commas, it can be quite confusing for the reader. Thirdly, we come to the least common of these 3 rules, and it's actually It's so uncommon that I don't recommend that you use it unless you're extremely confident. It's difficult to use this correctly, and even when we do use it quite correctly, it's quite unnatural as well. And oftentimes it would just be better to make this sentence into two separate sentences or use some kind of connection word to join the two clauses. So although this is a rule and we can use semicolons and it is sometimes an appropriate thing to do, it's not terribly important. So we'll just look at this very briefly. Basically what we do is we have independent clause plus semicolon plus independent clause. For example, there was a big traffic jam, cars were barely moving around town. Because the meaning of these clauses is very obvious, we don't need a word to join them together. And because they're so closely connected, it's better here to use a semicolon than a full stop to make them into different sentences. To review, we have just 3 rules to learn in order to use semicolons correctly. We can use them to join independent clauses with a conjunctive adverb. We can make complicated lists in which each item contains a comma, or some items contain a comma, or we can join very closely connected clauses when the link between the ideas is very obvious. Right, before we finish, I'll just remind you that I have an IELTS writing correction service. This is of great use to anyone that is preparing for the IELTS writing exam because you can get real expert feedback from a human being and not an AI bot that's going to give you generic feedback that contains some problems, let's say. I've been teaching IELTS for 16 years. I've been working as a professional writer for 20 years and also as an editor. And so I can give you detailed criticism and advice and then offer my own sample answer. I think it's the best way there is to prepare for the IELTS writing test.